Hey, welcome back to another video. Ghosts and Goblins. It's a name that many a retro gamer knows and probably fears. In case you're not familiar, Ghosts and Goblins is a series of games developed by Capcom, and in particular are the brainchild of Tokuro Fujiwara, who also worked as a producer on pretty much every mainline Mega Man game from 2 to 7, including the first 3 X games, and he's also the guy behind the Tomba games, or Tombi if you're in Europe. The first game in the Ghosts and Goblins series was released in arcades in 1985, but it's not in the game centers of old where it would make a name for itself. No, that would be the responsibility of the NES version, which came a year later in 1986. Far and away, the most notable element of this game is its difficulty. Ghosts and Goblins has a reputation as an incredibly, violently difficult video game, and it most certainly lives up to that. This game hates you, it hates your family, and it probably hates your taste in music too. Frankly, in my opinion, it's an absolute piece of garbage. At least the NES version is anyway. Ghouls and Ghosts on Genesis, and especially Super Ghouls and Ghosts on Super Nintendo, are pretty damn good games. But this video is not about Ghosts and Goblins. Not really, anyway. It is instead about one specific thing found in Ghosts and Goblins. This asshole. This is the Red Demon, or Red Aremer to use his proper name. Red Aremer is probably the most recognizable element of these games, and actually predates Arthur, the player character of the series, in terms of development. According to an interview with series creator Tokuro Fujiwara and designer Masahiko Kurakawa in the November 1994 issue of Famitsu, Red Aremer was made before they even really knew what kind of game they were making. Red Aremer was created for the original Makaimura, but actually the idea of this character came before we had any notion of what the gameplay would be. We had this demon character first, and in trying to think of who might be a good opponent for him, we came up with the idea of Arthur, the human hero. And if you're wondering about that slightly odd-sounding name, there's an interesting origin for it. When it came time to name Red Aremer, something about him reminded us of one of our employees, programmer Toshio Arima, so we chose a similar-sounding name. Pretty cool that a seemingly unknown programmer gets his name stamped on one of the most recognizable enemies in all of video games. In fact, Red Aremer ended up having such an impact on players that Fujiwara and the rest of his team figured it'd be interesting to put players in control of this imposing demon. Yes, they decided to give Red Aremer his very own video game, and that brings us to our actual topic for today. That decision led to one of my absolute favorite underappreciated game series, and I want to take some time to talk about it, because I learned absolutely nothing from that big-ass Mega Man X video last year. Luckily, though I am once again talking about an entire series, we only have 3, sort of 4, games to go through, so it's not going to be quite as big an undertaking, and yet, we still have that much time left in the video. Ladies, gentlemen, and all others, let's take a look at Gargoyle's Quest.
赤い炎の伝説がゲームボーイによみがえるレッドアリーマー魔界村外伝
The first game in the series was released on the Game Boy in 1990. According to that same interview I've quoted twice now, the decision to put the game on the Game Boy was made so as not to overshadow the mainline Ghosts and Goblins games in the arcades and on home consoles. The story of the original Gargoyle's Quest is hardly important. It's a Game Boy spin-off of a series that, to my knowledge anyway, has very little in the way of lore, after all. But here's the gist. The Demon Realm is under attack from King Brager, who wants to destroy the realm for non-defined reasons. According to an ancient prophecy, a member of the Red Aremer race named Firebrand is destined to become the Red Blaze and put a stop to Brager, as had happened sometime in the past. And that's pretty much the extent of it. Told ya, the story gets the job done, but it's not especially deep or important, really. However, hours of deep lore isn't exactly what we're here for anyway. Aside from starring one of the biggest pains in the ass from Ghosts and Goblins, Gargoyle's Quest differentiates itself from its parent series by shifting gameplay styles from a side-scrolling action game to a sort of hybrid between that and an RPG, not dissimilar to what Zelda 2 had done a few years prior. Much of the game is going to be spent in side-scrolling stages, but in between those is an overworld that definitely gives off vibes of many RPGs of the time. It's even got random battles, which take the form of really brief combat encounters with a couple of enemies. Seriously, you'll probably wrap these up in under 30 seconds every time. And that overworld really is the weakest part of the game. It's incredibly empty. There's literally nothing to do beyond getting from one location to another. The most engaging the overworld ever gets is when you're in the desert, which has these hidden tiles that push you around, so you actually need to try and navigate this place. Don't get me wrong though, it's still not super deep here. This area is small, and there's a really high likelihood you'll just stumble into the correct pathway before too long. And once you've finished the stage here, those tiles vanish, so you can just walk straight out. There are some items to find in the overworld, but it's all just vials, which are this game's currency. Sure, you can use those to buy extra lives, but you can find vials in stages, and you get them from random encounters too, so it's not all that worth it to go looking for them, especially since it opens you up to way more random battles. And depending on how high the encounter rate wants to be, you might end up in a lot of battles. Seriously, the encounter rate varies wildly. You could go a good while without hitting one, or you might finish a fight, take 2 steps, and get right into another one, so it can potentially get annoying. I am willing to put all that aside though, because really, at the end of the day, you don't spend all too much time in the overworld, and unless you have some truly bad luck because of some ancient curse or something, you're probably not going to run into random battles all that often. So, while navigating the overworld certainly has the potential to be grueling, more often than not, it's negligible. Plus, the action stages really are the meat of the game, and they're fun enough to more than make up for any of my problems with the overworld. Now, these are simple enough. You can jump and attack like you could probably expect, but Firebrand can also cling to walls, and put those wings to use and fly, adding another layer to the game's platforming. You could fly to reach some items, or just to correct yourself during a jump. Be careful though, because Firebrand cannot fly forever. Once that wing strength meter at the bottom of the screen depletes, you're gonna drop, and hopefully there is solid ground below you. Your wing strength fully replenishes when you land on the ground or grab onto something, so if you fall, you can latch onto a wall and get right back to flying. You know, assuming there actually is a wall nearby to grab. Managing your wing strength is pretty damn crucial during the platforming segments, as the game expects you to fly a lot. At the start of the game, you can only fly for a couple of seconds, which feels pretty limiting, but as you progress, you'll get new items that will let you fly for longer and longer periods of time, eventually getting to the point where you can stay in the air indefinitely. That is right at the end of the game, though. There's a lot of upgrades to run into on your adventure, from items that increase your health or jump height, to new attacks for Firebrand to unleash. And I do mean run into. You will get all of these as part of the natural progression. You're not going to be exploring for them. Quick tip, pretty much anytime you get a new attack, switch to it immediately. They're always better than your previous ones, and the only reason to ever switch back is for the specific abilities that some of them have. For example, once you get Claw, the only reason to go back to using the Block Breaker is for its specific ability to destroy blocks. For actual combat, you always want to stick with whatever your most recently acquired attack is. Well, with the exception of when you fight Rushafel, because for some reason he's only vulnerable to Block Breaker. With these upgrades, there's a definite feeling of getting stronger as the game goes on, even without the game borrowing a level up system from the RPGs it resembles. By the end of your adventure, you feel incredibly powerful, and it's always kind of a shock to me when I start a new playthrough, because Firebrand just feels so limited at the start of the game by comparison. Now, given that this is a spin-off of a legendarily difficult game, at this point you might be wondering if Gargoyle's Quest is as punishing as its parent series. Thankfully, it very much isn't. In fact, it's a pretty damn easy game, all things considered. It might give you some trouble on your first playthrough, and the start of the game when you only have 2 hit points can be a bit rough, especially when they bring in enemies that hit you for 2 damage, but this isn't the kind of game where you're gonna die 17,000 times. Even the final boss isn't all that difficult, and while I could definitely see that being an issue for some, I really couldn't care less. That relative lack of difficulty actually contributes to one of the big reasons I like this specific game so much, that being its very short playtime. Gargoyle's Quest is a pretty brisk playthrough, boiling down to barely an hour once you know what you're doing, and even on a first run through, it's only going to take you a couple hours. But like I said, I like the short length of the game. It makes it really easy to go back to since it doesn't take much time to go through. I've played through this game many times since I first experienced it on the 3DS Virtual Console back in like 2012 or something, and that's largely thanks to how quick it is to finish. No matter how many times I play it, whenever I go back, I'm gonna have a good time. That's fucking replay value. Outside of the gameplay, Gargoyle's Quest really nails its visuals too, especially for the console it's on. It is a relatively early game for the Game Boy, but I feel pretty confident in saying it's one of the best looking on the system. Now I'm playing this on Switch with the Game Boy Color filter on, so we are getting a bit more than what the original experience would have been like back in 1990, but having played it many times in black and white, the visuals stand out even there. Most notable to me is the way Firebrand's wings are always moving when you're in midair, flapping slowly when you're just jumping, and then moving noticeably faster when you begin to fly. It's a really neat detail. But it's not all perfect in the looks department, as Gargoyle's Quest suffers from a very high amount of flicker and slowdown when you've got more than a couple of sprites on screen. And if you get a couple of these snake guys following you at the same time, then you get to experience the sprite flicker and slowdown at the exact same time. It doesn't diminish the overall look of the game to me, but it is really distracting, and performance issues are going to be a regular problem for this series. The music's also pretty damn solid. It's not quite to the level of what we'll hear later in the series, but you get plenty of great tunes here, many of which are incredibly good at getting stuck in your head. Hellfield, Demon Border, and the Village theme are particular favorites of mine, but the whole soundtrack's really good. So, at the end of the day, the original Gargoyle's Quest is a really good game, way better than I think a lot of people might have expected out of a handheld spin-off from Ghosts and Goblins. It's a solid mix of exciting action with just a sprinkling of RPG that helps it stand apart from its parent series, and not being fuck ridiculous hard certainly helps a lot as well. For a long time, this is actually my favorite of the Gargoyle's Quest games, and while it's fallen from that spot, it's still a game that I adore, and would gladly put among my favorite games of all time. Top 20 easy, maybe 15. Gargoyle's Quest is readily available on the Switch through the Nintendo Classics Game Boy app, and I'd very much suggest giving it a try. It might not make quite the same impression on you that it did on me, but it's very much an overlooked game that deserves more recognition.
Capcom.
A couple years later, in 1992, Gargoyle's Quest got a follow-up in the form of Gargoyle's Quest 2: The Demon Darkness. This time we're on the NES rather than the Game Boy, I'm guessing because by now Ghosts and Goblins had made its jump to the Super Nintendo with Super Ghouls and Ghosts, so Capcom didn't feel it was in danger of getting overshadowed by Firebrand's adventures anymore. So, you remember that ancient prophecy I briefly mentioned in the story section for the first game? Yeah, that's the story of this one. Indeed, Gargoyle's Quest 2 is a prequel to the first game starring a totally separate Firebrand taking place centuries earlier. Like the first game, the story in Gargoyle's Quest 2 really isn't important. It is, for all intents and purposes, the exact same story, just with a few very slight differences. But also like the first game, who the hell cares? Gargoyle's Quest 2 will immediately feel familiar from the very second you start it up. Same basic game plan here as the first game. Side-scrolling action stages broken up by traversing an RPG-esque overworld, grabbing some new abilities that let you jump and fly higher, some new attacks. Second verse, same as the first. But we're not just retreading old ground here. Gargoyle's Quest 2 chose to take the sequel path of giving us more of what made the first game good, and just tweaking some of the stuff that needed improvement. For one, just by virtue of being on the NES, your field of vision is a hell of a lot bigger this time around. While Gargoyle's Quest 1 was designed for that small screen, it's still hard to ignore this sort of cramped feeling you get with it, but that is not an issue that this game suffers from. You get a lot more clearance to see what's ahead of you, so as long as you're not a fucking dumbass like me, you shouldn't be getting blindsided by much of anything here. The overworld has also been adjusted a bit this time around, as the random battles that populated the first title are nowhere to be found here. You can still fight enemies on the overworld, but now they're stationary encounters that you have to interact with to start the fights. Now, while I do appreciate taking out these battles because they really didn't fit and could seriously get annoying, it leads to the overworld having even less to do this time around. There are still a few items hidden off the main path, but you're very much still going from point A to point B here. Firebrand does move pretty fast in the overworld, so you won't be spending too long walking around, and you can get to those sweet action stages all the sooner. And those action stages are mostly as good as before. I've already mentioned the wider view that helps you better see what's happening around you, but the stages themselves are a bit more involved this time around as well. While I do love the first game, I'll readily admit that the action stages do tend to be a little basic. Lots of just moving to the right, or sometimes left or upwards, not very much in the way of unique stage mechanics. Gargoyle's Quest 2 shakes things up a good bit, requiring you to sometimes ride up some platforms while avoiding skulls that spit fire, navigate through all this damn sand, or find your way through a maze of mirrors, which sounds a lot more annoying than it really is. There is still a lot of just going to the right and whatnot, but they've generally increased the complexity of these stages compared to the original game. There is a little bit of jank that's been introduced, however. While the controls are overall still pretty damn tight, Firebrand now loses some momentum when you stop flying, so it's actually really easy now to just barely miss a platform. 9 times out of 10, this is annoying, but livable, since there's usually just spikes or an enemy beneath you, so you can just tank the hit and keep on going. But that one other time is when there's instant death below, and that's where this gets outright dumb. See, between major stages, you'll often come to these sections where you need to cross a river of flame, and this river will kill you if you touch it. For the most part, these aren't too much to worry about, but there's a couple where that change to your momentum really screws with you. The most egregious example comes when you need to cross the River of Flame just after you've gotten the wings of a fallen angel. This is the absolute strongest your wings can get right now, and making this jump is still a gigantic pain in the ass. Even if you leap from the absolute edge of this platform, you're probably not gonna make this. You've sort of got to jump from the edge and then pump your descent so that you conserve some wing strength, and that when you do run out, you don't lose as much momentum. And even then, you'll just barely make this. I always take several tries to nail this, and it never gets any easier. I cannot fathom how Capcom never realized this was an issue. There is actually a fan patch that changes the jumping to be more like the first game, and it does make this jump significantly easier. You don't even need to start from the edge of the platform to reach. With this patch, I think you'd literally need to try to fail. But we really shouldn't have to rely on fan patches for stuff like this, so that weird loss in momentum is certainly a flaw with Gargoyle's Quest 2. Hell, that one jump probably deserves to get counted as its own snag, given how scuffed it feels. Despite that, I do go back to play Gargoyle's Quest 2 a good bit, though not as much as I play the first game. One other thing I could see kind of being an issue for some is that Gargoyle's Quest 2 is very similar to the first game. The story is nigh on identical, the progression is very similar, and you get a lot of the same items between the two of them. In a lot of ways, it almost feels like Capcom was trying to do a half-sequel, half-remake, which sort of keeps Gargoyle's Quest 2 from really having its own identity. Now, that's not to say that this game has nothing unique to it, far from it. None of the stages are even a little bit like the ones in the first game, with whole new set pieces and their own unique gimmicks, so that sets it apart a bit. Plus, there's new items like the Tornado Shot, which, while not incredibly helpful as an attack, lets you make your own platforms, which really helps with some of the tougher platforming sections, and results in a few spots where you'll need to use this to get higher. But I can't ignore the many similarities to the first game, to the point where playing this one sometimes feels like deja vu. I have just been in this place before. I don't really mind that personally, but I could definitely see some thinking of this one as a bit of a retread. Like its predecessor, Gargoyle's Quest 2 isn't an especially difficult game, outside of that one specific jump. I do find this game to be a bit tougher than the first, but maybe that's just because I haven't played it as much. Still, you can blow through it in a little over an hour when you know what to do, so again we've got a game that's easy to go back to since it doesn't ask for too much of your time. Once again, Capcom has absolutely nailed it in terms of presentation. This game looks incredible. With the advantage of, being in color this time, Gargoyle's Quest 2 is able to show off some amazing looking environments, the most notable in my opinion being the forest. This is the area that comes to mind when I think of this game and its step up in presentation from the previous one. Firebrand's sprite has been touched up a bit, and he looks great, as do his animations, which still include the lovely detail of his wings flapping at different speeds. Plus, he's got a strut that even a Belmont would be proud of. The bosses also look pretty good, though they obviously don't have the same level of animation as Firebrand does. The two really big bosses at the end of the game are real standouts, but they do bring back that slowdown problem that the first game suffered from. It's not nearly as bad in this game in my opinion, Gargoyle's Quest 2 really only slows down during these fights and a couple small spots in stages, but it is still kind of a bummer. Also, if you're sensitive to flashing lights, this game has a real problem with them. I don't have any photosensitivity issues or anything, but it's to the point where the flashing actually bothers me. I recorded the footage for this video using a fan patch that gets rid of all that, and I would absolutely suggest using that if you can. If you want to play the game vanilla or not on an emulator though, just be aware of all the flashing. That kick-ass soundtrack is back in full force, and it's even better than the first game. This is NES-era Capcom tunes at their finest. It honestly ranks above a few of the Mega Man games for me. With tracks like Assault of Etruria, Dark Forest of Hydon, The Secret of Mount Emmaus, and Labyrinth of Mirrors, this game's soundtrack has been a mainstay in my brain from the second I first heard it. If you ask me, it deserves to get held up there with other NES greats like Mega Man and Castlevania. All in all, I'd say Gargoyle's Quest 2 is a step up from its predecessor in most ways, but I personally just don't like it quite as much. Though maybe that's just because I have played the first game a whole hell of a lot more, because the second game is no slouch. It's still damn good. Unfortunately, Gargoyle's Quest 2 isn't as accessible as the first one. At the time I record this, it is not available on the Switch's NES Classics app, and while it was available to buy on the 3DS and Wii U eShops, since those are closed now, there's no way of getting the game legally, which is a shame. You're just gonna have to play this one any way you can. Now, we're not totally done with Gargoyle's Quest 2, because for some reason, it actually got a port to the Game Boy, though it only ever came out in Japan. I'm playing a fan-translated version here that largely seems to just transplant the NES script onto this version of the game. There isn't too much to go over here. It is straight up Gargoyle's Quest 2 but on Game Boy, and comes with some of the restrictions that entails. The colors are obviously gone, and now the game actually suffers from the small screen size of the system since it was not designed around it. It doesn't cause too many problems, but there's definitely an increase in getting hit by some stuff that you weren't expecting. Also, Firebrand moves noticeably slower in the overworld now, so navigating it takes a bit longer than in the NES game, and he feels way the hell faster in side-scrolling stages for some reason. The real cool thing about this version, though, is that it includes 2 new stages that aren't in the NES version. Now, these aren't super interesting stages, although one of them does have this kinda neat gimmick where you hit switches to turn spikes into walkable floors. Completing these will net you 2 new items, one of which turns your regular fire into a homing shot, and the other lets you astral project and see what's around you. Unfortunately, these aren't especially good abilities. You don't get the homing fire until you've already got the next attack upgrade, so the damage is completely outclassed from the instant you pick it up. And the astral projection's on a time limit, so you can't really look around that much, but I think it's still pretty awesome to include some new content to make this port at least worth checking out. Just a shame it never made it stateside.
デモンズブレイゾン魔界村紋章編スーパーファミコンで新発売 Capcom.
Now we move to the Super Nintendo for the final game in the series and the one that I have the most to yap about. Not Gargoyle's Quest 3, but Demon's Crest. Turning back to that interview one more time, which was specifically about Demon's Crest by the way, the reason for the name change was to reflect that this was more of a full re-envisioning for the Super Nintendo than it was a sequel to Gargoyle's Quest 2. Which, you know, cool, but it makes it a little difficult to track the series, and I have seen many people who don't even realize Demon's Crest is a part of a series. As a result, it's pretty unclear where, if anywhere, this game is specifically supposed to fit story-wise in relation to the other two games. If I had to put it somewhere, I'd say this one is either far displaced from the other two, following a different firebrand again, or it comes after the first game and follows that game's firebrand, but it really doesn't matter that much. As for Demon's Crest's individual story, we're not just retreading the Red Blaze stuff again. This plot tells of 6 crests, powerful stones that embody the elements of fire, earth, water, air, time, and heaven. If all 6 crests are gathered together, whosoever holds them will not become the Avatar, but will gain the Crest of Infinity, and be possessed of incredible power and the ability to conquer all realms. Naturally, demons have long battled over the right to hold the crests, and Firebrand has already obtained 5 of them prior to the start of the game. He then challenges the wielder of the Heaven Crest, a demon dragon named Somulo. After a grueling fight, Firebrand eventually emerges the victor, despite heavy injuries. In his wounded state, Firebrand is ambushed by a demon named Phalanx, who steals all of the crests save for the Crest of Fire, which is instead shattered into 5 pieces like it was the Master Emerald. As Phalanx begins to use the crests to take over the demon realm, Firebrand is trapped in the Colosseum and made to fight the zombified remains of Somulo. After felling the undead dragon, Firebrand sets out to defeat Phalanx and recover the crests. Yeah, the story is a good bit more involved this time around, though pretty much all of that is just in the game's opening cutscene. There's very little in the way of story in the rest of the game, save for the short bits of dialogue you get during some boss fights and during the ending. I used to not think too much of the story to Demon's Crest because of how little it comes up in the game, but these days I do quite like it, especially considering this was still a time where anything that wasn't a full-on RPG didn't really focus much on story anyway. There's even multiple endings, all dependent on how many items you collect before you take out the final boss, which is pretty cool. Regarding the gameplay, we've seen quite the shift compared to Gargoyle's Quest 2. The basics are still the same, side-scrolling action with some slight RPG elements, but now we've really toned down those RPG bits. So from Gargoyle's Quest 1 to 2, we saw the random overworld battles done away with and changed to static enemy encounters, yeah? Demon's Crest decided to drop overworld battles altogether and then went, you know what, screw the overworld too. This time around, instead of wandering across the land of the demon realm, the overworld is really just a glorified stage select screen powered by the godly abilities of Mode 7 that takes about 15 seconds to cross in its entirety, if that. Now that might kind of sound like a complaint, but I actually do prefer this. The bigger overworld in the last 2 games was largely pretty empty, and you were honestly just going from point A to point B anyway, so I see this as trimming the fat. And since you're not restricted to the path of an overworld, you can do the stages in pretty much whatever order you want. Plus, not having that big overworld makes it incredibly simple to revisit stages, and that's something you're going to be doing a lot. Demon's Crest is much closer to a Metroidvania-style game than its predecessors, as you'll be gaining new abilities throughout the course of the game that allow you to pick up more items in areas you've already visited. That's not really to say that this game is a Metroidvania, it's just closer to one than the last 2 games were. It is ultimately still a stage-based affair, but you can definitely feel the natural evolution from the previous games, given that you did gain new powers as those ones went on, but those were exclusively new attacks or better wing strength, and they didn't expect you to revisit old areas once you'd acquired them. Now though, there's a whole bunch of stuff to find, including vellums, which you can imbue with largely useless spells, vials, which can be filled with potions, and most notably the various crests and pieces of the Fire Crest. The Fire Crest pieces are essentially like the new attacks you'd get in the last 2 games, to the point that the loadout you end up with is identical to the one you get in Gargoyle's Quest 2. The other crests are your major upgrades that allow Firebrand to transform into other gargoyles, each with their own unique abilities that you're going to need to find most other items. Some of these are pretty well hidden too, expecting you to fly straight upwards with no indication or swim through a wall to find. It's certainly not impossible that you could stumble upon them, but they're not the easiest things to find. Just make sure to keep an eye out for spots that might take you to an alternate route through a stage. You'll pretty much always find some goodies in the other pathways. Probably the most annoying item to get is one specific health extension. First, you have to just know that this nondescript lake houses a minigame, which as far as I know, nothing in the game tells you about. The other 2 instances of this minigame are pretty easy to find, but there is nothing to my knowledge that indicates that this one is here. Then there's the minigame itself being a giant pain in the ass. It's a simple game in theory, skulls come out of the wall and you've got to use Firebrand's headbutt to break them. Break 25 before time runs out, and you get the upgrade. In practice though, this shit sucks. The main difficulty comes from the delay on the headbutt. It takes a second for it to come out after you've pressed the button, so for any of the skulls that aren't on the lowest level you have to jump and time the attack so it hits the one you're after, which is much easier said than done. It's hardly the most difficult thing I've ever done, but it can be incredibly frustrating to try and nail this. God help you if you're playing on original hardware without save states or rewind or something. There's also the 5 talismans to find, each of which will give you a passive bonus just from having them equipped, like the Crown Talisman making it more likely for you to get money drops, or the Armor Talisman reducing the damage you take by half. Not that you'd actually know what these do once you acquire them, because the game doesn't actually tell you what they do when you pick them up, or in the submenu. The Japanese version says what they do, albeit somewhat cryptically, but at least it says something. The English manual doesn't even mention that the talismans exist, let alone what they do, so your only option is to take them to this guy in the second stage, and he'll tell you what they do. Not the most convenient thing, but I'll take it over needing to just figure out what they do. Finding a crapload of items isn't the only way they've altered the side-scrolling levels, though. In the previous games, you had to keep an eye on your wing strength to make sure you didn't plummet to your death, but that is not the case in Demon's Crest, because wing strength has been entirely removed. You heard that right, now Firebrand can fly indefinitely right from the start of the game. No longer do you have to worry about just barely missing a jump and dying, thank fuck. At first, it sounds like this would be broken as hell, but they've designed stages and obstacles to accommodate this. Some stages might want you to go upwards, so you're still going to have to do wall jumps to progress because Firebrand does not naturally have any way to ascend while flying, and some levels might not even have floors. Now, once you grab the Crest of Air and can transform into the Aerial Gargoyle, most platforming becomes child's play, since the Aerial Gargoyle has the ability to ascend while flying, making him incredibly maneuverable. His attack is also pretty strong, though a couple of bosses are outright immune to it, so it's not like Aerial Gargoyle is the easy mode. Each transformation has their uses, but the title Gargoyle is likely going to see the least amount of use overall. There's only a couple sub-areas that are entirely underwater, and outside of those, the only times you even want to get in the water is to grab 2 items in the second stage, which you can grab without the title Gargoyle if you're willing to tank the damage from just being in the water. Compare that to the ground Gargoyle, who can not only break statues and whatnot that are in your way, but also has a strong attack early on, the aforementioned Aerial Gargoyle, and most especially the legendary Gargoyle you get from the Crest of Time, and Title Gargoyle is easily the least handy of your forms. That said, the different forms are all very fun to mess around with, even Title Gargoyle, and on your first go, it's so exciting for a boss to drop a crest, because you know you're in for a new form, and you want to know what it can do. The crests are all dropped by bosses, which are probably the most scuffed part of the game because of how wildly the difficulty varies. By and large, the bosses are piss easy, but there's a couple that are a right pain. The 3 times each that you fight the Hippogriff and Arma, for example, offer little to no real challenge, and pretty much any time I get hit is due to my own dumbassery more than anything else. But then you've got Groan and the final bosses who can be real trouble if you're not prepared. There's also the Crawler, which isn't exactly difficult, but it does take a while. It's got a good bit of health, and you only deal damage to it when its eye is open, so you're going to be shooting at it for a few minutes. Good tip, some bosses are weak to particular attacks or forms, and picking the right one can lead you to cutting down bosses a little bit faster. This is another thing the game doesn't actually tell you about, as far as I'm aware anyway, but that information is pretty readily available online if you want to look for it. In general though, like the previous games, Demon's Crest isn't too difficult overall, and even when it does put up some challenge, it's never overwhelming. And as you go on, you've got so many tools at your disposal that you can likely find a way through pretty much any snag you might hit. In case you do find yourself struggling, equip the Crown Talisman and break some windows in Stage 2 to get some cash, then fill as many vials as you can with Ginseng potions. Ginseng fully restores your health, so as long as you don't forget to use it like I sometimes do, it'll give you a 2nd or 5th wind if you need it. If you really want to tear through shit though, then do I have the thing for you. If you get the good ending, which requires collecting everything in the game and then beating Phalanx, your inventory should look like this. Then after waiting a frankly ridiculously long time after the credits, you'll get a password. Popping this baby in starts you in the overworld with every item you've collected already, plus a brand new transformation in the Ultimate Gargoyle, and it lives up to its name. In addition to taking less damage than Firebrand normally does, which stacks very well with the Armor Talisman, this form also has every ability of the other crests combined. It can fly like Ariel, swim like Tidal, charge like Ground, and its default attack does a crapload of damage to just about everything. Most enemies are killed in one shot, and a good chunk of bosses will melt before your might. Just about the only things the Ultimate Gargoyle can't do is light the candles in a couple of stages, or break these vines, so you are going to have to switch to plain old Firebrand and Aerial Gargoyle respectively for those. Otherwise, the Ultimate Gargoyle rips this game's legs off and beats it to death with them like Quan Chi. I love playing this game normally, but it's also very fun to boot up the game, punch in the password, and just breeze through the whole thing. There is a more practical use for this, because putting in that password also unlocks the true final boss, and beating that nets you the true ending, so it's not like it only exists to destroy the game. Gameplay-wise, Demon's Crest is clearly a hell of an expansion on the previous games, and with its more open-ended structure, you can keep it fresher by going in different stage orders on each playthrough or trying to see how much of the game you can complete using only one of your transformations. Try a Tidal Gargoyle only playthrough, see how that goes. Hell, challenge yourself by going without potions or talismans. There's a lot of ways to play Demon's Crest. Even if there weren't though, the basics are just so much fun that I'm always ready to go back to it. By now, you've probably noticed how fucking gorgeous this game looks, keeping the trend of the series knocking it out of the park with every system they're on. We've got this sick-ass gothic style all through the game that perfectly fits the series, and stands out from the slightly more cartoony visuals of the last two games. This is the pinnacle of style for Gargoyle's Quest, the look it was always meant to have, but that the Game Boy and NES just couldn't quite get. The environments are breathtaking, and the enemies are varied and ghoulish, some even grotesque, and Firebrand himself has never looked better. His animations are top-notch with really smooth wing movements and another damn good walk cycle that just says, "Look out, assholes, here comes Firebrand." He's got slightly different headbutt animations depending on if you're in the air or grounded. When you fire a shot, the light reflects onto Firebrand's sprite, and even the death animation rules. Dude straight up melts like he's Crocomire, and it varies slightly for some of the transformations. But all these incredible visuals come at a price, and that's far and away the worst slowdown of the series. If there's more than a couple enemies on screen, or you're fighting off Nunu, the game slows to a crawl, which I can live with, but it's a damn shame that they couldn't quite get it to run smooth all the time. Thankfully though, that slowdown does not affect the stunning soundtrack, which is among the best OSTs on the SNES in my opinion. Composed by Toshihiko Horiyama, who also worked on soundtracks for Mega Man X, Onimusha 2, and Apollo Justice, the music adds even more to that gothic feel. A lot of these songs sound like something you'd hear in an old horror movie or a stage play, and they do such an incredible job of enhancing the game's mood. If you need a video game soundtrack for Halloween, this is it. It's honestly hard to single out tracks because they are all incredible. The title screen theme is definitely worth pointing out since it's the first thing you're gonna hear, and it was genuinely jaw-dropping the first time I heard it alongside the opening visual. Check this shit out. That's just fucking awesome. Metropolis of Ruin plays in the town hub of Stage 2, and just sounds like a run-down ancient building or dilapidated castle, like it should be playing over an establishing shot of Dracula's castle or something. Palace of Decadence is both regal and sinister, like something out of Phantom of the Opera, fitting for the theme of the stage leading up to the fight with Phalanx. Catacombs of the Dead is one of the more minimal pieces in the game, but is effectively unsettling. It makes me think of how it'd feel going through the catacombs of Paris, literally surrounded by death. Those are just some of my favorites because I do need to limit myself, but tracks like Dance of the Snowy Barons, Memorial of the Fallen Ones, The Crests Are Hidden Forever, and pretty much every other song in the game are equally as incredible. So you remember way back when I said that Gargoyle's Quest 1 used to be my favorite game in this series? Yeah, that changed when I replayed Demon's Crest for this video. I liked Demon's Crest before this, but it was really only a game I played every couple of years as opposed to Gargoyle's Quest, which I'd usually play at least a couple of times every year. But going back to it for this video, something about it just clicked differently for me, and it shot way the hell up. Just in the time I've been working on this video, I've played through Demon's Crest like 6 times. I think it's a fucking addiction at this point. It's risen the ranks to become one of my favorite games of all time, and I think it deserves to be considered one of the best action games on the Super Nintendo. Unfortunately, this was where Firebrand's story came to an end. Demon's Crest reviewed well, but it was not a hot seller, in Japan anyway. I have no clue about sales elsewhere, with Nintendo Power reporting in their September 1997 issue that it actually had negative sales one week because more people returned it than bought it. Capcom internally considered it a failure and thus never did another Gargoyle's Quest game. Back in 2016, Jules Watson, co-founder of the now-defunct studio Renegade Kid, revealed that they had pitched a GBA port of Demon's Crest to Capcom, but they turned them down, citing the poor sales of the game. I'm not super confident a GBA version would have been great, but it might have been something to keep the series around at least. Thankfully, Capcom has not totally ignored our demonic friend for the last 30 years. Firebrand got to show up as a fighter in both Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, and he was one of about 1 billion Capcom characters present in the second Archie, Sonic, and Mega Man crossover, Worlds Unite. He wasn't important, but he was there. Apparently there's also a Red Aremer Joker in the Japan-only game Namco Cross Capcom that's implied to be Firebrand, as he mentions a crest war that happened in the Demon Realm long ago, but as far as I could gather from some snooping around, the details of the crest war mentioned in that game don't totally line up with Demon's Crest, so I don't know. These days you can experience most of the series on the Switch through the Switch Online Classics service, which has the original game and Demon's Crest, though like I mentioned before, the second game is still nowhere to be found, and there's not a legal way to play that one right now. I don't expect it to happen, but I really would like to see Capcom truly revisit this series. They're very into releasing collections right now, and I would absolutely buy a Gargoyle's Quest trilogy, especially if they included a bunch of bonus art and shit like they've done for the Mega Man and Ace Attorney collections. The dream really would be a full remake of even just Demon's Crest, really leaning into the Metroidvania elements and turning it up to 11. In a perfect world, I'd really love to see it in that HD 2D style that's been seeing a lot of use lately, mostly in RPGs, but I think it could work for this too. Demon's Crest would look absolutely gorgeous like that, but even just modern standard pixel art would be more than great. Hell, I think I'd be alright with them just finally releasing the second game on the Switch Online thing so more people can play it. Come on, Capcom. But as it is now, Gargoyle's Quest is on ice, and it remains as one of Capcom's best series that rarely gets the attention I feel it deserves. Hopefully I was able to show you how good these games are and convince you to check them out for yourself if you've never played them before. This video sorta got out of hand. I really wasn't expecting it to turn out as long as it has, but I can get really long-winded when I talk about things I love, even when no one else gives a shit. So that's gonna be it from me. I'm gonna go rest. Thank you all for taking the time to sit through this, if you did indeed do so. I hope you have a great day, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is for you, and I will see you guys next time.